The sound of an angle grinder screaming against 70-year-old steel is, to most people, just noise. It's an auditory nuisance, a metallic shriek that frays the nerves and sends small animals running for cover. To me, it was the sound of progress. It was the sound of salvation. My church was a two-car garage in the heart of Whispering Willows, a suburban paradise so quiet you could hear a property value increase. The Holy Trinity I worshipped was grease, rust, and rock and roll. My deity, a skeletal 1,972 Datsun 240s I'd christened Kenji, was up on 4 jack stands, looking less like a classic car and more like an automotive crime scene. For the past 6 months, my prayers had involved a lot of power tools, whispered curses, and the occasional triumphant whoop that would echo in the enclosed space. I'm a reasonable guy. I work from home as a graphic designer, spending my days in the sterile, digital world of pixels and vectors. The garage was my escape. It was real. It was tangible. I could touch the dents, smell the WD-40, and feel the satisfying click of a socket wrench locking onto a rusted bolt. I understood the social contract of suburbia. It's a delicate ecosystem built on unspoken agreements. You don't park on your lawn, you bring in your trash cans on the same day they're emptied, and you don't make a racket. So, I followed the rules. My sacred garage time was confined to weekends between the civilized hours of 10 a.m. and 6 p.m. I wasn't running a chop shop. I wasn't a monster. I was just a guy, trying to coax a piece of automotive history back to life before it dissolved entirely into a pile of orange dust. On this particular Saturday afternoon, the sun was filtering through the single dusty window of the garage, illuminating floating dust motes like tiny, sparkling angels. Led Zeppelin was crooning softly from a Bluetooth speaker in the corner. I had my safety goggles on, my gloves fit snugly, and I was carefully cutting away a cancerous patch of rust from the rear quarter panel. The angle grinder whined for maybe 90 seconds, a controlled, surgical burst of noise. When I finished, the silence that rushed in to replace it felt profound. I lifted the goggles, wiped a sheen of sweat from my brow with the back of my glove, and took a step back to admire the clean cut. It was a small victory, but it was a victory nonetheless. I cracked open the mini fridge tucked under my workbench and pulled out a cold beer. The condensation trickled down the brown glass as I took a long, satisfying sip. This was my sanctuary, my peace. And then I saw her. Striding up my driveway with the grim determination of a drill sergeant inspecting the barracks was a figure that struck a very specific kind of fear into the hearts of Whispering Willows residents. She was armed with a clipboard, a smartphone clutched in her other hand, and an expression that could curdle milk from 50 paces. It was Carol Peterson. "Alexander," she began, stopping just at the edge of the garage opening, as if afraid to be contaminated by the raw masculinity of it all. She didn't call me Alex. Nobody but my mother called me Alexander, and usually only when I was in trouble. Carol said my full name like it was a naughty word she'd been forced to utter. "We need to have a discussion," she continued, her voice a high, reedy thing that seemed to vibrate with indignation, "about the cacophony." She pronounced cacophony as if it were a rare and deadly disease I was personally incubating in her front yard. I instinctively glanced at my speaker. "Was Robert Plant too loud for you, Carol? I can switch to something softer. Simon and Garfunkel, maybe?" Her thin lips tightened. "This isn't about your music. It's about the industrial noise." Section 4, subsection B of the Whispering Willows Covenant clearly states that any noise audible beyond the property line must not be of a disruptive or industrial nature. She tapped her clipboard with a perfectly manicured nail for emphasis. I wiped my hands on a rag and walked to the front of the garage, trying to radiate friendly, harmless neighbor. "Carol, hi. It's a classic car restoration. It's a hobby, see?" I gestured towards Kenji. "It's a 72 Datsun. They don't make them like this anymore. It requires a little bit of work to bring it back from the dead." She refused to even glance at the car, her gaze fixed on me. A hobby that, according to my decibel meter app, she held up her phone, displaying a screen with a terrifying-looking graph. "Registered well into the orange zone during your last grinding episode." The orange zone? Was she a one-woman Department of Homeland Security for neighborhood noise? I took a deep breath, fighting back the wave of sarcasm that was threatening to drown me. My next-door neighbor, Bob, and his commercial-grade leaf blower probably registered as a Category 5 hurricane on her little app, but now wasn't the time to point that out. This was my first official run-in with the infamous Carol Peterson, president, treasurer, and sole member of the Neighborhood Beautification Committee. Play nice, I told myself. De-escalate. Wow, I had no idea, I said, injecting as much sincerity into my voice as I could muster. I'm really sorry if it bothered you. I'll tell you what, I'll look into getting some of that sound-dampening foam for the garage door. That should help keep the noise contained. She gave a tight, unconvinced nod, as if my apology was a flimsy ceasefire agreement in a war only she was fighting. I've documented this conversation, she said, making a note on her clipboard. You've been issued a formal written warning. The next violation will result in further action. With that, she pivoted on her sensible walking shoes and marched back down the driveway, her posture radiating a triumphant, self-righteous aura. I stood there, beer in hand, watching her go. The peace of my sanctuary had been shattered, not by the screech of my grinder, but by the reedy voice of suburban tyranny. A sense of deep, unshakable foreboding settled over me. This was only the beginning. The following Saturday, I was a changed man. I was a considerate man. I had spent $100 at Home Depot on thick, gray foam panels and had painstakingly installed them on the inside of my garage door. It wouldn't make the space soundproof, but it was a genuine effort, a tangible olive branch to the noise gods, and more specifically, to the noise goddess who lived 3 doors down. The task for the day was relatively benign. I needed to drill a few small holes to mount a new fuel pump. A drill, even a powerful one, is an objectively quieter tool than a lawnmower, a leaf blower, or even an over-enthusiastic golden retriever. I made sure the garage door was down, sealing me inside with my car and my newfound sense of civic duty. I picked up the drill, said a small prayer to the ghost of Soichiro Honda, and drilled 4 holes. Each press of the trigger lasted maybe 5 seconds. The whole operation was over in less than a minute. I was just wiping down the area when my phone, sitting on the workbench, buzzed. I picked it up. It was an email. The sender, C. Peterson, at whisperingwillowshowa.org. The subject line, in aggressive all caps, read, "Second official notice, continued noise violations." I opened it, my heart sinking. The email was a masterwork of the form, a digital tapestry of passive aggression and petty bureaucracy. It was CC'd aboard at whisperingwillowshow.org, which I was fairly certain was just another email address Carol had created that forwarded directly back to herself. Alexander, this email serves as your second official warning regarding excessive noise originating from your property. At precisely 2:17 p.m. today, a high-frequency drilling sound was clearly audible from my residence. The disturbance lasted for approximately 55 seconds, occurring in several short bursts. As per my previous communication, this constitutes a clear violation of Section 4, subsection B. Your attempt to install sound-dampening materials, while noted, has proven insufficient. For your reference, I have attached a link to a peer-reviewed article titled "The Psychological Dangers of Intermittent High-Frequency Noise on Suburban Serenity." I trust you will find it educational. Please consider this matter with the seriousness it deserves. A third violation will automatically trigger the fine schedule outlined in the HOA bylaws. Sincerely, Carol Peterson, President, Neighborhood Beautification Committee. I stared at the screen, a strange mix of fury and awe washing over me. She had timed me with a stopwatch. She must have been sitting by her window, ear pressed against the glass, just waiting. The link to the article was The Chef's Kiss. I clicked it. It was a real article from some obscure psychology journal. My first call was to my best friend, Dave. He was a high school history teacher who harbored a deep academic appreciation for human conflict, especially the petty kind. "You will not believe this," I said, skipping the pleasantries. "I got another one." "From Chairman Carroll?" he asked. I could hear the smirk in his voice. "Worse, she's promoted herself to supreme leader. She timed me, Dave, down to the second. She sent me a scientific paper on the dangers of drilling sounds. I think she has listening posts set up in her garden gnomes." "Dude, I told you, you're dealing with a pro," Dave said, his voice alight with amusement. "This is her life's work. This is her masterpiece. You're the villain in her epic poem. What's your next move?" "What can I do?" I sighed, pacing the confines of my garage. It suddenly felt less like a sanctuary and more like a prison cell. I worked with the door closed today. It was like a sauna in here. I guess I'll just have to. I don't know. Learn to fix the car using only hand-cranked tools? There was a pause on the other end of the line. Or, Dave said slowly, and I'm just spitballing here. You could buy a tuba and practice every day at 1 p.m. Thanks, Dave. Super helpful, I grumbled. But a tiny, treacherous seed of an idea had been planted. Not a tuba. Something else. Something better. 2 weeks passed in relative quiet. I hadn't touched a power tool. Kenji sat forlornly under a dust cover, his restoration stalled. I was trying to wait Carol out, to lull her into a false sense of security. The summer heat had settled over the neighborhood like a thick, wet blanket. On a blisteringly hot Saturday, I couldn't stand it anymore. I had to do something. I decided on a task so quiet, so ridiculously unobtrusive, that not even Carol could find fault with it. I needed to gently tap a piece of chrome trim into place around the driver's side window. The tool for the job. A small rubber mallet. I kept the garage door closed, turning the space into a sweatbox. I laid a towel down to protect the paint, positioned the trim, and began to tap. Thump. 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 The sound was dull, muted, a soft percussion that was barely audible over the hum of my own refrigerator from inside the house. It was the acoustic equivalent of a sleeping kitten's heartbeat. I was certain I was safe. I was wrong. A sharp, authoritative knock echoed from my front door. It wasn't the friendly rap of a neighbor or the hurried thump of a delivery driver. It had weight, it had authority. I sighed, setting the rubber mallet down. I trudged through the house, my t-shirt soaked with sweat, and pulled open the door. Standing on my porch, looking deeply, profoundly unhappy to be there, were 2 police officers. The older one had a thick mustache and weary eyes that had seen too many domestic disputes over sprinkler systems. The younger one had a fresh-faced look and was fighting, unsuccessfully, to keep a straight face. The older one, whose name tag read Miller, heaved a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of the entire world. "Sir," he said, his voice flat, "we've had a noise complaint." I blinked. "A noise complaint? Are you serious? For what? Was my breathing too loud?" Officer Schmidt, the younger one, coughed to cover a chuckle. "The report mentioned a rhythmic, incessant banging, sir." The absurdity of it washed over me, and I started to laugh. It was a humorless, slightly hysterical laugh. A rhythmic, incessant banging? I was using a rubber mallet, to tap a piece of trim on? Did she think I was in there forging the lost sword of a Norse god? It's 100 degrees out. I'm dying of heat stroke to keep the noise down, and she calls you guys for the sound of a rubber mallet? Officer Miller looked completely unsympathetic. "Look, kid, we don't care, honestly. But the dispatcher has to send a car out on every call. It's policy. Is the, banging over?" "Oh, it's over," I said, my voice dripping with a sarcasm I couldn't contain. "My apologies for interrupting your important police work with the sound of me pursuing a harmless hobby at a volume quieter than most television commercials. I'll try to be more considerate next time I'm committing the heinous act of tapping." Miller just nodded, his expression unchanging. "Have a good day, sir." They turned and walked back to their patrol car, their boots heavy on the pavement. I watched them go, and something inside me snapped. The annoyance, the frustration, it all curdled and hardened into a cold, diamond-hard point of rage. This wasn't about a Datsun anymore. This wasn't about noise. She had crossed a line. She hadn't just complained to me. She hadn't just sent a passive-aggressive email. She had called the police. She had used armed agents of the state as her personal butlers of silence, all because of a sound that wouldn't have woken a sleeping baby. I slammed my front door, the rattle echoing through the quiet house. The war had been declared, and I had no intention of losing. The next morning, the declaration of war was formalized. Taped to my front door was a crisp, white envelope from the Whispering Willows Homeowners Association. My hands trembled slightly as I tore it open. Inside, on thick, official-looking cardstock, was a fine. A $150 fine. The reason listed was creating a public nuisance, police intervention required. But that wasn't the worst part. Tucked behind the fine was a separate sheet of paper. It was a notice of a new addendum to the HOA bylaws, effective immediately. It was clearly written by Carol herself, filled with her signature brand of pseudo-legal jargon. It stated that any hobby-related noise, of any kind, that resulted in a police dispatch would incur an automatic and non-negotiable fine, which would double upon each subsequent offense. That was it, the Rubicon. The point of no return. I stood there in my entryway, the fine in one hand and the new rule in the other, and I felt a strange sense of calm descend upon me. The rage was still there, but it was no longer a hot, chaotic thing. It was cold, focused, and creative. She had built a fortress of rules around her, a paper castle from which she could launch her attacks with impunity. She thought she had me cornered. She thought she had won. She hadn't just weaponized the rules, the cops, and the entire concept of being a good neighbor to bully me into submission. She had given me a challenge. My project, my sanctuary, was now officially a crime scene. $150 for using a rubber mallet. Fine. She wants noise? She wants a public nuisance? Oh, I'll give her a public nuisance. I would orchestrate a public nuisance so spectacular, so audacious, and so utterly, unimpeachably legal that her perfectly coiffed head would spin right off her shoulders. My phone was already in my hand, my thumb hovering over Dave's contact. My mind was racing, sifting through the insane, half-formed ideas that had been brewing in the back of my skull. First call, Dave. Second call, City Hall. The game was on. My living room looked like the den of a madman. Crumpled balls of paper littered the floor around the coffee table, which was covered in empty coffee mugs and a laptop displaying the driest, most soul-crushingly boring document known to man, the city's complete municipal code. It was nearly midnight, and Dave was on a video call with me, his face projected onto my TV screen. He looked as sleep-deprived and crazed as I felt. "Okay, how about this?" Dave said, his eyes gleaming with maniacal energy. "You declare your garage a sovereign nation, the People's Republic of Kenji. Then you can claim diplomatic immunity." "Tempting," I said, rubbing my temples. "But I think international law might be a bit above my pay grade. Plus, I don't think the mailman would recognize my authority." All right. What if you host a charity bake sale every weekend, and you use a megaphone to announce the cookies? Get your snickerdoodles! Freshly baked and guaranteed to infuriate tyrannical neighbors. All proceeds go to the Alexandrian Fund for sound-dampening foam. She'd find a rule against unlicensed commerce or unapproved signage before I could even preheat the oven. I countered, scrolling listlessly through another chapter of legalese. I need something bigger. Something official. Something she can't touch. "A protest?" Dave offered. "We can make signs. Honk if you hate petty despots. My power tools, my choice." "Too political," I sighed. "She'd just paint me as an anarchist trying to disrupt the peace. It has to be something that looks wholesome on the surface. It has to be bulletproof." I kept scrolling, my eyes glazing over endless sections about zoning restrictions, pet licensing, and sidewalk maintenance. And then I saw it, tucked away in a section I almost skipped. The words seemed to leap off the screen, glowing with a holy light. My breath caught in my throat. "Holy crap," I whispered. "Dave, shut up for a second. Listen to this." I leaned closer to the laptop, my voice taking on the reverent tone of a man who has just discovered a lost religious text. Chapter 12, Section 8, Parade and Public Procession Permits. Dave's face on the screen tilted in confusion. "A parade?" "Just listen," I insisted, reading aloud. "A permit may be granted for any public procession, march, or parade for the purpose of celebration, community engagement, or cultural expression." It goes on with a bunch of legal nonsense, but then, oh, this is the good part. The permit grants the holder the right to temporary street closure and exempts them from standard municipal noise ordinances for the duration of the event, provided the noise is directly related to the expressive content of the procession. I looked up from the laptop, a slow, Cheshire cat grin spreading across my face. I could see the gears turning in Dave's head through the screen. His own expression shifted from confusion to dawning horror, and finally, to pure, unadulterated glee. "No," he breathed, his eyes wide. "You wouldn't." "Oh, I think I would," I said, the plan blossoming in my mind in glorious technicolor detail. "I'm going to throw a parade." "A parade for what?" Dave yelled, now laughing. "The We Hate Carol Peterson March?" No, that's too on the nose," I said, already grabbing a notepad. It has to be legitimate. It will be the inaugural Whispering Willows Automotive History and Culture Celebration Parade. I paused for dramatic effect. And the parade route, I said, my voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, is going to be a single, glorious, half-mile loop. Down Willow Lane, a sharp right onto Petunia Drive, and then another right back up Whispering Way, over and over again. For the full duration of the permit, a route that, by a funny coincidence, happens to circle one specific beige-colored house. Dave was speechless for a moment, before erupting into a fit of laughter so loud I had to turn down the TV's volume. "You are my hero," he wheezed. "My absolute unhinged hero." The next morning, I drove to the city government building, a monolithic concrete structure that seemed designed to suck the very will to live from anyone who entered it. After wandering through a beige labyrinth of corridors, I found the permits and licensing department. The air inside was stale, smelling of old paper and quiet desperation. I took a number 142 and sat down. The flickering display screen showed they were currently serving number 88. An hour and a half later, my number was called. I approached the counter, my heart pounding with a nervous excitement. Behind the plexiglass shield sat a woman who looked as if she had been carved from the same bored, tired concrete as the building itself. Her nameplate read, Brenda. She was chewing gum with a slow, rhythmic motion, her eyes fixed on her computer monitor. "Help you?" she mumbled, not looking up. "Yes, hi," I said, trying to sound cheerful and normal. "I'd like to apply for a parade permit." Brenda stopped chewing. Slowly, she lifted her head and looked at me over the top of her reading glasses. It was a look that communicated, with no words at all, that she had seen every scam, every crazy scheme, and every pathetic attempt to bend the rules that this city had to offer, and she was not impressed with mine. "Name of event?" she asked, her fingers hovering over her keyboard. I took a breath. "Inaugural Whispering Willows Automotive History and Culture Celebration Parade." Brenda's fingers froze. She stared at me. "The what?" "It's a celebration," I said, forcing a wide, enthusiastic smile, "of automotive history and culture, specifically in the Whispering Willows neighborhood." "Uh-huh," she said, her tone flat. She began to type, each keystroke a loud, deliberate clack. "And the culture is?" "The culture of freedom from petty despots who think the sound of a wrench tightening is a war crime," I thought. "The culture of classic car restoration," I said aloud. "It's a vibrant and important part of our community's heritage that deserves to be celebrated." Brenda just stared at me, her chewing slowing to a contemplative pace. "Right, route?" "Oh, it's a very simple route. Just a small loop. Down Willow Lane, then a right on Petunia Drive, and another right back up Whispering Way to the start." She raised a single, skeptical eyebrow. Her eyes flicked down to a map of the city on her desk, then back up to me. She knew. She knew exactly which house was the epicenter of that tiny, pointless loop. She didn't say it, but her look did. "It's a very intimate and focused parade," I offered, my smile feeling strained. Without another word, she reached under the counter and produced a packet of forms so thick it could have stopped a bullet. She slid it through the opening in the plexiglass. "You'll need proof of liability insurance for a public event, a detailed traffic control plan, a sanitation plan, a list of all participating units with descriptions, and a notarized statement of purpose. Fee is $500. Application deadline for events in the next quarter is Friday." It was Monday. I had 4 days. I looked at the mountain of paperwork, the labyrinth of bureaucratic hurdles designed to make people give up. But looking at it, I didn't feel defeated. I felt energized. This was the price of admission. This was the cost of victory. "Thank you, Brenda," I said, picking up the packet. "You've been a great help." She just grunted and went back to her gum. I walked out of that building not with a permit, but with a quest. And as I stepped back out into the sunlight, I realized the $150 fine from Carol was just the down payment. The $500 permit fee was the next installment. This was quickly becoming the most expensive act of spite in history, and it was worth every single penny. My garage had become my command center. I'd bought a large whiteboard from an office supply store and mounted it on the wall. On it, I had drawn a detailed, almost military-grade map of the parade route with Carol's house marked with a big red X. Underneath, I had a checklist: insurance, traffic plan, sanitation, units. This was no longer a one-man operation. I needed an army. My first call was to my neighbor Bob, the aforementioned leaf blower enthusiast. Bob lived 2 doors down and had a lawn that looked like it belonged on a PGA tour. His pride and joy was a gas-powered leaf blower that sounded like a 747 taking off. Carol hated it, and by extension, she hated Bob. He was a natural ally. I found him outside, meticulously edging his driveway. "Bob," I said, walking over, "I have a proposition for you. If it's about joining the HOA board to overthrow Carol, I'm in," he said without looking up. "It's even better than that?" I grinned. "How would you feel about an opportunity to operate your prized 6.5 horsepower, dual-stroke leaf blower completely legally, with the full blessing of the city, for 2 straight hours on a Saturday morning?" Bob stopped edging. He slowly stood up and looked at me, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "Go on." I explained the parade. By the time I was finished, he was vibrating with excitement. He immediately got on his phone. Within an hour, he had recruited 3 other dads from the neighborhood who were similarly oppressed by Carol's reign of quiet terror. They were all tired of being told when they could and could not do their yard work. They officially dubbed themselves the Whispering Willows Horticultural Maintenance Division and promised to bring their loudest, most obnoxious, but still technically residential, yard equipment. The first unit was secured. Next on the list, music. It needed to be annoying, repetitive, and thematically appropriate. My mind immediately went to Dave and his connections. "Mr. Henderson," Dave said into his phone, pacing around my living room. I was listening in on speaker. "Dave Miller here, history teacher over at Northwood High. How's the marching band looking this year?" There was a muffled response from the band director on the other end. "Great, great," Dave said. "Listen, I've got a paying gig for the band, a little community parade. It's a great chance for the kids to get some public performance experience." "A parade?" Mr. Henderson's voice was tinny but clear. "What's the occasion?" "A celebration of automotive culture," Dave said, winking at me. "Short route. We'd need you for about an hour. And here's the thing. We have a very specific musical request. We need you to play one song and one song only, on a loop, for the entire hour." There was a skeptical silence. "One song? What's the song?" Dave took a deep breath. "The theme from the Benny Hill Show." The silence that followed was heavy with judgment. "You mean yakety sax?" "Mr. Gaudy my Katie Sax," Henderson finally asked, his voice strained. "You want my award-winning high school marching band to play yakety sax for an hour straight? We're prepared to make a $1,000 donation to the band program for your time and effort," Dave said smoothly. This was my money, of course, a fact that made my stomach clench and my heart sing at the same time. There was another pause, this one shorter. "Rehearsal is on Tuesday," Mr. Henderson said. "We'll be ready." The final piece of the puzzle was the centerpiece. The main event. The float. I needed a professional. My search on a niche online forum for classic car enthusiasts led me to a single, cryptic post. "Got a crazy idea for a float? Talk to Gus. He's seen worse." I met Gus at a greasy spoon diner on the outskirts of town. He was a man in his late 60s, with a weathered face, a grease-stained flannel shirt, and hands the size of dinner plates. He looked like he'd been building things since before I was born. I slid into the booth opposite him. "Gus?" He grunted and took a long sip of black coffee. "I hear you build parade floats," I said. "Sometimes," he said, his voice a low rumble. "What's the theme?" I leaned forward, lowering my voice. "The theme is malicious compliance." Gus stopped stirring his coffee. He looked up at me, a flicker of genuine interest in his tired eyes. "Go on." "I need a float," I explained. "A standard flatbed trailer. On it, I want you to build a perfect, life-size replica of my garage workshop. Workbench, tools on the pegboard, greasy rags, the works. And in the center of it, on a raised platform, I want my Datsun, polished up, looking like a museum piece. A jewel on display." Gus nodded slowly, picturing it. "Easy enough." "But that's not all," I continued. "I need sound. I need the biggest, loudest speakers you can legally mount on a float. Top of the line." "And what'll be playing on those speakers?" Gus asked, a hint of a smile touching his lips. "A meticulously curated 60-minute audio loop," I said, unable to keep the grin off my own face. I'm going to professionally record the sounds of me working on my car. The angle grinder, the drill, the rhythmic, incessant banging of a rubber mallet. All of it, amplified to the maximum decibels allowed by a city parade permit. Gus was silent for a long moment. He took another sip of his coffee. Then he set the mug down with a soft click and extended a massive, calloused hand across the table. "I'll take the job," he rumbled, "and I'll give you a discount." Word was starting to get out. You can't plan a parade in a neighborhood like Whispering Willows without the rumor mill kicking into high gear. My sympathetic neighbor, Maria, who lived across the street and despised Carol with the passion of 1,000 burning suns, became my secret informant. Her texts came in like intelligence briefings from the front lines. Maria, text, "Carol is asking questions. Saw her talking to Bob. She looked angry. She knows you're planning something. She called it premeditated hooliganism to Mrs. Davison next door." The inevitable confrontation came a few days later. I was getting my mail when she descended upon me, clipboard conspicuously absent. She was trying for a casual, off-the-cuff approach, but her eyes were narrowed with suspicion. "Alexander," she said, her voice unnaturally sweet, "I hear through the grapevine that you're planning some sort of gathering." I gave her my most pleasant, unthreatening smile. "Oh, just a little community event, Carol. You know, celebrating local culture, bringing people together. You should come. It's happening this Saturday, starts at 10 a.m. sharp. Don't worry, you won't be able to miss it." Her smile faltered. "I feel it is my duty to inform you that my lawyer has been notified about your campaign of continued harassment." "That's wonderful," I said with genuine cheer. "Tell him to bring a lawn chair. He'll want a good view of the festivities." I gave her a little wave and walked back inside, leaving her fuming on the sidewalk. My heart was hammering. The bluff had to hold. The next afternoon, an official-looking email from the city landed in my inbox. The sender was Brenda, P., at cityofnorthwood.gov. The subject line was simple. Permit application 734. B. I held my breath and clicked it open. My eyes scanned the boilerplate text until they found the magic words. "Your application has been reviewed and found to be in full compliance with all municipal codes. Permit.734.B is hereby granted." I shot out of my chair with a yell of triumph. I printed the email, the attached permit, and the traffic plan. I walked over to the dollar store, bought a cheap, gaudy gold frame, and mounted the permit in it. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever owned. The night before the parade, my garage was no longer a workshop. It was a staging area, buzzing with the nervous, giddy energy of a theater crew on opening night. It was 2 in the morning. Gus, Dave, and I stood back, admiring our creation. The float was magnificent. It was a masterpiece of pettiness. Gus had outdone himself. The replica of my workbench was perfect, right down to the coffee stains and the half-empty bag of zip ties. The pegboard was lined with my actual tools, gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights. And there, in the center, sat Kenji. I had spent the entire day polishing him. The Datsun's original red paint, where it wasn't rusted through, shone with a deep luster. He looked less like a project car and more like a chariot of the gods. The speakers, huge black rectangles mounted on either side of the flatbed, looked menacing even in silence. "Are we sure about this?" Dave asked, his voice a nervous whisper. "I mean, this is a level of premeditated spite I've only ever dreamed of achieving. It feels almost holy." I walked over to the wall and tapped the gaudily framed permit. "We are past the point of no return, my friend," I said, my voice filled with a theatrical gravitas. She wanted to fine me for the sound of a rubber mallet. Tomorrow, she gets the symphony of the rubber mallet. In Dolby surround sound, backed by a high school brass band playing circus music. Looking at the float, I felt a surge of pure, unadulterated joy. This was, without a doubt, the most ridiculous, expensive, and time-consuming up-yours in human history. Was it overkill? Absolutely. Was it insane? Almost certainly. But as I looked at that framed piece of paper from the city, I knew it was also 100% legal. The city of Northwood, in its infinite bureaucratic wisdom, had given me a license for chaos. The morning of the parade dawned bright and clear, a perfect Saturday. By 9:55 a.m., Willow Lane looked like the staging ground for the world's most pathetic and bizarre invasion. The vanguard was Officers Miller and Schmidt in their patrol car, parked at the head of the street. They were a required part of the traffic control plan. Their rooftop lights were flashing slowly, casting lazy blue and red strobes across the manicured lawns. Miller was staring straight ahead, nursing a large coffee, his expression that of a man who had made a series of very poor life choices. Schmidt, in the passenger seat, was trying to be subtle about filming the whole scene on his phone. Behind them stood Unit 1, the Whispering Willows Horticultural Maintenance Division. Bob and his 3 recruits stood in a loose formation, wearing safety goggles and holding their leaf blowers and lawnmowers like soldiers at ease. They had a grim, determined look on their faces. This was their Normandy. Behind them was Unit 2, the Northwood High Marching Band. The kids, looking deeply confused but also vaguely thrilled to be out of Saturday morning cartoons, were fidgeting with their instruments. Mr. Henderson stood before them, baton at the ready. And then there was the main event. My float. Pulled by Gus's rusty but reliable pickup truck, my mobile garage workshop was a thing of terrible beauty. I was standing on the float itself, dressed in my usual work clothes, holding a large wrench like a king's scepter. Dave was at a small control panel wired to the giant speakers, a maniacal grin plastered across his face. Our audience of one was in position. Across the street, on her pristine porch, stood Carol Peterson. She had 2 of her similarly sour-faced friends with her for support. She was holding her phone, her thumb hovering over the call button, a smug look on her face. She was confident that whatever pathetic protest this was, she could shut it down with a single phone call. She had no idea what was coming. I looked at my watch. 9:59 and 50 seconds. I caught Dave's eye. I caught Bob's eye. I caught Mr. Henderson's eye. I gave them all a slow, deliberate nod. At precisely 10:00 a.m., I raised my wrench high in the air and brought it down. The symphony began. First, Dave hit the play button. The sound of an angle grinder, my angle grinder, the exact sound from that very first Saturday, erupted from the speakers with the force of a physical blow. It was deafening, glorious, and perfectly legal. A split second later, Mr. Henderson's baton sliced through the air. The marching band launched into a surprisingly energetic and brassy rendition of Yakety Sax. The cheerful, idiotic tune clashed horribly with the industrial scream of the grinder, creating a unique hellscape of sound. Then, Bob gave his signal. The Horticultural Maintenance Division yanked the starter cords on their machines. 4 leaf blowers and 2 lawnmowers roared to life, a chorus of 2-stroke engines adding a deep, guttural bass line to the cacophony. Gus put the truck in gear, and the float lurched forward. The parade had begun. I looked over at Carol's porch. Her jaw had dropped. The smugness had evaporated, instantly replaced by a look of pure, uncomprehending rage. Her mouth was moving, she was clearly screaming, but not a single sound she made could penetrate our wall of noise. Her friends looked equally horrified, holding their hands over their ears. "How's the decibel level?" I yelled to Dave over the glorious din. He held up a decibel meter app on his own phone, giving me a wild-eyed thumbs up. "Perfectly legal, my friend. We are in full compliance." The procession crept forward at a torturously slow pace. As we drew level with her house, I made direct eye contact with Carol. Her face was turning a shade of crimson I had previously only seen in sunset paintings. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I didn't give her the satisfaction. I simply raised the wrench in a slow, solemn, respectful salute, as if acknowledging a worthy adversary. This, I could tell, infuriated her more than any taunt ever could. She finally snapped. She ran off her porch, stumbling across her perfect lawn, and charged at the police car, shoving her phone in Officer Miller's face. "Aren't you going to do something?" she shrieked, her voice a thin, pathetic thread against the tidal wave of sound. "This is illegal! It's harassment!" Officer Miller took a long, slow sip of his coffee. He deliberately set the cup down, then reached over and picked up a clipboard from his dashboard. On it was a copy of my parade permit. He held it up for her to see. "Ma'am," he said, his voice calm and steady, "according to the city of Northwood, this isn't illegal. It's community engagement. My hands are tied." He gestured towards the band with his thumb. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I think the tuba section is really hitting its stride." Defeated, Carol staggered back to her porch. The parade crawled past her house, completed its turn onto Petunia Drive, and then again onto Whispering Way, ready to begin its second loop. And then its third, and its fourth. For 1 solid hour, we circled her block, the same soul-shredding grind, the same moronic circus tune, the same roar of suburban yard equipment. It was a surreal, hilarious, and deafening spectacle of spite, sanctioned and protected by the very laws she had tried to use against me. At exactly 11:00 a.m., I gave the signal. Dave faded out the grinder. Mr. Henderson cut off the band mid-oompa. Bob and his crew killed their engines. Silence descended. It was the most profound, most beautiful silence I had ever heard. It felt heavier, richer, and more satisfying than the hour of noise that had preceded it. My driveway looked like the aftermath of a very weird party. The band kids were packing up, chattering excitedly. Bob and the lawnmower dads were high-fiving each other. Gus was already unhitching the float from his truck, a rare, genuine smile on his face. Dave was lying flat on his back on my lawn, laughing so hard he was crying. Then, a movement across the street caught my eye. The war was not quite over. There was to be one final, unconditional surrender. Carol stomped across the street, her 2 friends trailing behind her like defeated aides-de-camp. Her face was blotchy and red, her hair was a mess, and her eyes burned with a fire that had no fuel left to burn. She came to a stop in front of me, her chest heaving. "You!" she sputtered, her voice hoarse from an hour of useless screaming. "You!" I adopted my most helpful, neighborly tone. "Carol, it occurred to me that maybe you just couldn't appreciate the subtle nuances of the sounds of my hobby from a distance. So, I thought I'd bring them to you, in a culturally enriching, city-approved format. Did you enjoy the celebration?" "This isn't over," she whispered, though the threat had no conviction. "Oh, I think it is," I said cheerfully. I leaned in a little closer. "By the way, I was reading the permit. It's good for 1 event per quarter. I'm already planning the fall parade. The theme is a tribute to percussive maintenance. It's going to feature a lot of hammering." The last bit of fight went out of her eyes. It was replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated defeat. She said nothing. She just turned, her shoulders slumped, and trudged back to her house, a broken woman. As she went, my neighbor Maria emerged from her own house, carrying a plate of still-warm chocolate chip cookies. She walked right up to me and gave me a hug. "You are a legend, Alex," she whispered, "a suburban legend." As we stood there, Officer Miller's patrol car drove slowly past my house. He wasn't stopping, just finishing his patrol of the now peaceful area. He caught my eye. He didn't smile. He didn't wave. He just gave me a slow, deliberate nod. It was a nod of understanding. A nod, I dared to think, of respect. Then he drove away, leaving me in my quiet, victorious kingdom. A week later, I was back in my garage. The door was wide open. The sun was shining. Kenji was on the stands, but he looked less like a patient and more like he was just resting. I was using a power buffer on the front fender, its moderate whirring sound mixing with the chirping of birds. I worked without fear. There were no emails, no written warnings, no cops, just the peaceful sound of a man and his hobby. 2 letters had arrived that week. The first was from the Whispering Willows HOA. It was a formal letter rescinding my $150 fine. Tucked inside was a check for $500. The memo line contained just 3 words. "Please, don't anymore." The second was a note from Maria. Carol Peterson had officially resigned as HOA president, citing health reasons. The rumor was she was putting her house on the market, looking for a remote cabin in the mountains where her only neighbors would be squirrels. Sometimes, when I'm out here now, a neighbor will walk by. They'll smile. They'll give me that same little nod that Officer Miller did. In the quiet, unspoken world of suburban warfare, I was the guy who fought the law, and the law, for once, was on my side. I never wanted a war. I just wanted to work on my damn car. But I learned a valuable lesson. If you push a reasonable man too far, you might just force him to become gloriously, beautifully, and legally unreasonable. I finished buffing the fender. It gleamed in the afternoon sun. I grabbed a beer from the fridge, pulled up a stool, and sat down, just listening to the silence. It was a silence I had earned. And it was the best damn thing I had ever heard.